Welcome to this introductory session on nuclear physics. In this session we'll be talking about the following aspects. So we'll talk about the composition of a nucleus. We'll look at the general properties of nucleus including size, in terms of radius, the density, the charge and mass, and we'll have a brief look at the concept of spin. We'll also look at what makes a nucleus stable in terms of nuclear stability, and we will talk about what is known as a liquid drop model. Then subsequently we will be discussing about two important concepts such as nuclear magnetic resonance and MRI. And then we look at nuclear forces, what constitutes nuclear forces, what are the properties, characteristics, nature of nuclear forces. We talk about Einstein's famous equation E equal to mc square. Then we look at definitions of AMU, is atomic mass unit, nuclear binding energy, nuclear fission, fusion, and the source for solar energy. Basically it's called stellar energy. So these are the topics we are going to discuss in this session, the introductory course on nuclear physics. Now to start with, let us start from the top. So it was in the year 1911, that Rutherford conducted some experiments regarding alpha ray scattering of alpha rays by atoms, and based on his observation and based on his experimental results, he suggested that he suggested a model for an atom as per which we have a central core and then the electrons are revolving around the core. So we have electrons here revolving around the core in orbits, and then we have the central core here. So, and Rutherford also predicted that this central portion has a size of the order of 10 to the power of minus 15 meters. He said that this is the order of the radius of the central core. So he also said the central core has the entire mass of the atom. So this was the starting point. Now we know that the central core consists of two aspects. We are going to look at what constitutes a nucleus. So we are only going to concentrate in this session on what constitutes the inner core here. The inner core is what we call as a nucleus. So basically we have the nucleus, and then we have the electrons revolving around the nucleus. Now in this session we are only going to concentrate on what is inside this nucleus and aspects about this nucleus. We are not worried about the revolving electron around the nucleus. So let us start off with some known things about the nucleus. So just to give you an idea, the size of the radius of the nucleus is of the order of 10 to the power of minus 15, whereas the size of the atom as such is of the order of 10 to the power of minus 10 meters. So this is 10 to the power of minus 15 meters, and this is of the order of 10 to the power of minus 10 meters. So I can write down this as, this one is 10 to the power of minus 10 meters, and then this portion is of the order of 10 to the power of minus 15 meters. So size of nucleus is 10 to the power of minus 15, size of the atom as such is of the order of 10 to the power of minus 10 meters. Now let us look at this aspect of what is inside a nucleus. Basically we are looking at composition of a nucleus. What constitutes a nucleus, or what is inside the nucleus. So there were several, based on our past experiments, based on the several experiments that were conducted, it is found that the central nucleus, if I can represent that as a spherical object here, consists of it consists of, so let me write it down here, a nucleus consists of what we call as protons, which are positively charged protons, and neutrons. So neutrons are electrically negative. So neutrons are electrically negative, whereas protons are positively charged. So we have protons and neutrons inside the nucleus. So a nucleus essentially consists of positively charged protons and electrically neutral neutrons. Now we use a common term called nucleon. So nucleon basically stands for either a proton or a neutron. So nucleon is a common term used for proton or neutron. So a proton is a nucleon, and likewise a neutron is a nucleon. So a nucleus consists of nucleons. Nucleus consists of nucleons. Essentially, a nucleus consists of positively charged protons and electrically neutral neutrons. So the next we define certain terms here which are very important concepts for us. So the first thing is, let me draw a line here. So let us assume, as we mentioned, we said that there are protons here and neutrons. So a nucleus consists of neutrons and protons, essentially nucleons. So let me say that the number of protons, let me take some typical example and say number of protons is, I represent it by the term Z, and number of protons plus neutrons is A. So A is called the mass number. We call A as the mass number. And we call Z or Z as the atomic number. So number of protons is represented by the symbol Z or Z. Number of protons and neutrons, that is the total number of objects, that is protons plus neutrons, or the number of nucleons inside the nucleus is represented by A. So we call A as the mass number. A mass number is nothing but the number of protons and neutrons put together inside the nucleus. So A is the mass number and Z or Z is the atomic number. So the atomic number represents the number of protons that are there inside the nucleus. So obviously when I have the mass number, which is protons plus neutrons as A, and then I have the atomic number, I can find out the number of neutrons. So the number of neutrons would be, number of neutrons is obviously A minus Z. So the number of neutrons is A minus Z. So let me recap again. So we said the atom consists of central or core object called nucleus. Surrounding that core are the revolving electrons. Now the radius or the size of this atom is of the order of 10 to the power of minus 10 meters. Now the size of this nucleus is typically of the order of 10 to the power of minus 15 meters. And now the central core, we are looking at the composition. The central core composes of two different types of objects. One is, it consists of protons which are positively charged, and we also have neutrons inside the nucleus. And neutrons are electrically neutral. Protons are electrically positively charged, neutrons are electrically negative. So the number of protons you have inside the nucleus is exactly equivalent to the number of electrons you have here in different orbits. So the number of electrons and number of protons in an atom are identical. So the number of protons and number of electrons are identical, making the atom electrically neutral. So the atom is electrically neutral because number of protons is same as number of electrons, and the neutrons that we have inside here are electrically neutral. And now we talked about two concepts here. One is the mass number, represented by the character A. The mass number of a nucleus, stands for the number of nucleons we have inside the nucleus. And now Z or Z stands for the atomic number. So the atomic number of a nucleus essentially gives a count of the number of protons, positively charged protons we have inside the nucleus. So based on this, these two definitions, we can say that the number of neutrons inside the nucleus is A minus Z, because A is sum total of number of protons and number of neutrons. Therefore the number of neutrons is A minus Z. And now we represent, pretty similar to the way we represent the chemical structure of an atom, we represent the composition of a nucleus like so. The composition of a nucleus, so let me write it down. Chemical symbol. So the chemical symbol of the nucleus is we represent that as AXZ or AXZ, where X represents the atom type or the nuclear type, and then A stands for the mass number and Z or Z stands for the atomic number. For example, I have 7 3 Li. So as you know, Li is lithium. So if I write 7 3 Li, it means that it is a lithium nucleus. It is a lithium nucleus with mass number 7 and atomic number 3. That means this lithium atom, or this lithium nucleus rather, has got 3 protons inside that and 4 neutrons. So this lithium nucleus consists of 3 protons and 4 neutrons. And the total number of nucleons inside this lithium nucleus is 7. So this is how we represent the, this is the representation for the nucleus. Now with this we have given a general idea about the composition of the nucleus. Now let us move on to discussing the general properties of the nucleus, such as size, density, charge, mass, etc. So let me take up the first item over there, which is size of the nucleus. As I mentioned earlier, the nucleus size is the order of 10 to the power of minus 15 meters. Now experimental results have shown, experiments show that I am going to derive an expression for the size of the nucleus. So experimental results show that the volume of nucleus is directly proportional to the mass number. So experimental results show that the volume of the nucleus is directly proportional to the mass number. That is, more number of nucleons you have inside the nucleus, more is the volume. So actually, although we say that the nucleus is of spherical type, experiments have shown that it is not strictly spherical. I mean, you cannot define the boundary exactly as such. But still, for all practical purposes, we take that as a spherical object. In the sense, we take it as a spherical object, and experimental results show that the volume of the nucleus is directly proportional to the proportional to the mass number. More number of nucleons, more is the volume. So based on this, let us calculate the expression for the size of a nucleus. So therefore we know that the volume of a spherical object, assuming that the nucleus is a spherical object, we know that 4/3 pi r cube. 4/3 pi r cube is directly proportional to A based on this experimental results. Therefore we have r cube is directly proportional to A. So from this, since 4/3 pi is a constant, you can take it out, we can say r cube is directly proportional to A, or r is directly proportional to A to the power of 1/3. And I take the cube root on both sides. So I will say r is proportional to A to the power of 1/3. Now we will introduce a constant called r naught. Since we have a proportionality sign there, we say r is equal to r naught into A to the power of 1/3. So this is the expression we have now. So this says that the radius of a nucleus is proportional to 1/3 the mass number of the nucleus. So R0 here is a constant and has a value and is equal to 1.3 Fermi. So let me write down here as to what 1 Fermi is. 1 Fermi is 10 to the power of minus 15 meters. 1 Fermi, unit of 1 Fermi is 10 to the power of minus 15 meters. Now we have shown that R, the radius of a nucleus, is equal to R naught, that is 1.3 multiplied by A into 1 by 1/3. A raised to the power of 1/3. This is the cube root of A. So this is the expression we have for radius of a nucleus. So once we know the mass number, we can compute the radius of that specific nucleus. So with this we have looked at the size. Now let us move on to the next one, that is density of a nucleus. So we know this is the size. Now let us calculate the density, expression for density for a nucleus. So I am going to compute the density of nucleus. So we know that density is equal to mass divided by volume. So we know that density is given by mass divided by volume. Now let us say, we also know that we have, let M be the average mass, average or mean mass of a nucleon. Remember, the term nucleon is used to represent a proton as well as a neutron. So let N be the average mass of the nucleon. Therefore we have mass of the nucleus would be M into A. So A is the mass number, that is the number of protons and number of neutrons inside the nucleus is A, and now mass of average mass of a nucleon is A, and therefore the total mass of the nucleus is given by the expression M into A. Now we already know that volume, is equal to 4/3. Since we are considering the nucleus as a spherical object, we know that the volume is 4/3 pi r cube. 4/3 pi r cube, which is the same as 4/3 of pi into, we know that r cube, just now we saw that r cube is equal to r into a to the power of 1 by 3, and therefore r cube would be equivalent to cube of r into a to the power of 1/3, which is the same as 4 by 3 pi into r cube into A. So A is the mass number of nucleons plus number of nucleons inside the nucleus. So I have an expression for the volume, I have an expression for the mass. Now I can calculate density, and therefore I say the density, so density is given by mass divided by volume, and therefore density is equal to mass, which is Ma. So this is from equation 1 and equation 2. So from 1 and 2 I find, from 1 and 2 I find that density is equal to Ma divided by 4/3 pi r cube into A, which is the same as 3m divided by 4 pi r cube. Therefore density is equal to 3m divided by 4 pi r cube. So this expression shows that, I'm sorry about that, this should have been R naught, which is a constant value of 1.3 Fermi. So this should be R naught. So remember that R is equal to R naught into e to the power of 1/3. So this is R naught. R naught is a constant, and therefore I find that density is always a constant. So density of a nucleus is constant. So irrespective of number of nucleons you have, the density is constant for a nucleus. Let me give an approximate idea about for the density. So for this calculation shows that the density of nucleus is constant. It does not depend on the nucleus as such. So the order of density is about, density is, just to give you an idea about the density, is 1.85 into 10 to the power of 17 kgs per meter cube. So this is the order of the density of a nucleus. It's extremely dense. So density is 1.85 into 10 to the power of 17 kgs per meter cube. So now after having looked at the density, let me look at the charge. So let me write down charge. Is pretty easy to get the charge. So let me take down, and this is 2. So charge of a nucleus. So remember that I mentioned that the nucleus consists of positively charged protons and neutral neutrons, and therefore the entire charge of the nucleus is provided by the positively charged protons that are there inside the nucleus. And we also said that the number of protons is given by Z or Z, number of protons. Is also the atomic number. So the atomic number is represented by Z and is the number of protons. And therefore, if E is the charge on the proton, charge of proton, then total charge of nucleus is given by Ze. So this is the total charge of the nucleus. So it's a positive charge. And also note that, just to recap, if I have Z or Z number of protons inside the nucleus, I will have the equivalent number of electrons revolving around the nucleus. So the charge on the nucleus is Ze, or Ze, and the charge of the electrons is minus Ze. And therefore, the atom as such is electrically neutral. So we have looked at the charge of the nucleus. So incidentally note that E is the charge on the E is the charge of proton is the same as the charge on the electron. The electronic charge basically. Now we looked at size, we looked at density, we looked at charge. Now let us look at the mass of the nucleus. So when we look at mass of the nucleus, subsequently we will also be looking at what is known as AMU, which I probably didn't write it down here, yeah, definition of AMU. At that time we will be revisiting this concept again. But right now we will just write down the nuclear mass. We'll get a simple expression for the nuclear mass. So let us say that let MP and Mn be the mass of proton and neutron respectively. So I am saying that Mp is the mass of the proton and Mn is the mass of the neutron. So we know that neutron plus proton constitutes nucleus. And we also know that A is number of protons and B is number of protons plus neutrons. So from these two I find that gives the number of neutrons. So the total mass of therefore the total mass of the nucleus is equivalent to mass of proton Mp A, number of protons, multiplied by mass of a proton, plus number of neutrons is E minus A multiplied by Mn. So this is the mass of the nucleus. So this expression will give the mass of the nucleus. So note that the atomic mass is measured. Atomic mass is measured in terms of unit called AMU. This is the atomic mass unit. We'll come back to this definition subsequently, but just for now just note that the atomic mass is measured in terms of AMU. And just to give you an idea, if I have it here, I can. (1.66 into 10 to the power minus 27 kgs). 1.66 into 10 to the power of minus 20 kgs. So just to give you an idea about how much is 1 AMU. 1 AMU is equal to 1.66 into 10 to the power of minus 20 kg. That is the mass of atomic mass unit. So this is the expression for nuclear mass. A simple expression for the nuclear mass. Now the last topic we are going to discuss about here is the spin of a nucleus. We will be revisiting this concept of spin when we discuss about nuclear magnetic resonance. So basically what happens is the nucleons, that is the protons as well as the neutrons inside the nucleus, have a spin and an angular momentum. Much similar to this Earth itself rotating around its own axis, we can consider the nucleus itself as rotating or having a spin. So that is what we mean by spin. So the total angular momentum, so we define spin as spin of a nucleus is the resultant angular momentum of the nucleus. As I mentioned earlier, the nucleons have its own angular momentum as well as an angular momentum as well as an orbital momentum. So when you take the sum or the vector sum of the individual angular and orbital momentums of the nucleons, then we get the spin or the angular momentum of the nucleus as such. That resultant angular momentum is called as the spin of the nucleus. So we use the concept of spin of the nucleus when we talk about nuclear magnetic resonance. So that is about the general properties of nucleus. Now the next topic we are going to discuss about the nuclear stability. What makes a nucleus stable? So let me move on to the next topic, which is the stability of a nucleus. What constitutes? So there are two aspects. Now we are looking at nuclear stability. Basically there are two important concepts that you need to be aware of when we talk in terms of nuclear stability. One is called the binding energy, and the other one is related to number of protons and number of nucleons, composition of nucleon. Let me take it out. Composition of the nucleon. So these are the two important factors that we need to be aware of. Now let us start off with nuclear stability. What do we mean by nuclear stability? Remember that we said a nucleus consists of positively charged proton and the neutral neutrons. So these protons, as they are compressed together, I also said that the nucleus has a very small diameter. The size of a nucleus is very small, 10 to the power minus 15 meters. So if that is the case, we have so many positively charged protons coming closer to one another in such a small space. Obviously there is going to be repulsive forces between the positively charged protons. So that is if we consider only electrostatic forces, then the nucleus would have been unstable. They would have blown apart, because as you bring the positively charged protons together, there would have been repulsive forces. But it doesn't appear to be so. In the sense, the nucleus is quite stable. There are large number of nucleus that are quite stable. So that gives an idea about what makes the nucleus stable. So basically, we talk about nuclear forces in this case. Nuclear forces. So we say that there are what are known as nuclear forces. The forces that bind these nucleons together. So there is a nuclear force acting between any two nucleon. So a proton and a proton, there is a nuclear force between those two protons. Likewise, a neutron and a neutron has a nuclear force among themselves. So a proton and a neutron again is bound by a nuclear force. See, the nuclear forces are far greater or higher compared to the electrostatic force, and that is the reason we find nucleus to be quite stable. So the electrostatic forces are quite smaller. Electrostatic repulsive forces between any two protons, for that matter, is far smaller compared to the attractive nuclear forces between two protons, and that is the reason a nucleus remains stable. So that is the explanation for the stability of a nucleus. So also when we discuss about nuclear forces, we will be talking something more in detail as to what are the nature of these nuclear forces. But for now it is sufficient to know that there exist what are known as nuclear forces, and they overcome the repulsive forces, repulsive Coulomb forces, or the electrostatic force. So with that in background, let us move on to what constitutes the stability of the nucleus. Now given that we know that there are nuclear forces which make the nucleus stable, what other parameters decide whether the nucleus is stable or not. So given that we have the nuclear forces, what are the factors that define the stability of a nucleus? So the first thing we talk about is a binding energy. We'll be discussing about binding energy subsequently here, but for now it is sufficient to know that the binding energy per nucleon, or the binding energy of a nucleus, binding energy per nucleon is the energy that is needed to release that nucleon from the nucleus, to break up the nucleon. So the binding energy tells me how tightly these nucleons are coupled, or how tightly they are held together. So higher the binding energy per nucleon, more stable is a nucleus. Higher the binding energy per nucleon, more stable is the nucleus. So greater the binding energy, greater is the stability of the nucleon. So this is the first concept. Next, when we talk about composition of nucleons, there are two aspects we need to compare here. Lighter nuclei and heavier nuclei. The plural for nucleus is nuclei, and that's what I written there. So there are two things we need to be aware of when we talk about the composition of nucleons. So lighter nuclei such as hydrogen, helium, and those which have lower mass number. And now heavier nuclei are those which have higher mass number, larger mass number. So when we talk in terms of nuclear stability, we look at it from two angles. One is how does it work for lighter nuclei, how does it work for heavier nuclei. Now first thing is, as far as lighter nuclei is concerned, if this is atomic mass number is equivalent to, then such nucleus are stable. They got a higher stability. For lighter nuclei, if the number of protons is equal to number of neutrons, then such nuclei are quite stable. So if number of protons inside the nucleus, is equivalent to number of neutrons inside the nucleus, then such nuclei, as far as lighter nuclei are concerned, are considered quite stable. Such nuclei are quite stable. When you look into heavier nuclei, it happens that if A minus Z is greater than Z, then such nuclei are quite stable. That means number of neutrons inside the nucleus are far greater than the number of protons inside the nucleus, then such nuclei are quite stable. So it's logically quite simple to understand why this should be so. It's because as you put more and more protons inside there, the repulsive forces increase, and therefore if you have neutrons inside there, they somewhat neutralize the electrostatic forces. So this is the logical explanation we can think of. But in general, for lighter nuclei, the number of protons and number of neutrons, if they are equal, then such nuclei are stable. For heavier nuclei, if the number of neutrons inside the nucleus is greater than the number of protons we have inside the nucleus, such nuclei will be stable. So we discussed about nuclear stability at this time. We talked about the nuclear forces that are acting inside the nucleus. We said the nuclear forces are far greater than the Coulomb forces. So the nuclear, and these forces are always attractive forces. The nuclear forces are attractive forces and they act in short range. We look at some of the nature of these nuclear forces. So these nuclear forces hold these nucleons together, overcoming the electrostatic repulsive forces. And then the nuclear stability is decided by two important concepts. One is the binding energy per nucleon. If the binding energy per nucleon is greater, then such nuclei are stable. And next is composition of the composition of the nucleus. Composition of the nucleus. So we said that for lighter nuclei, if the number of protons is equal to number of neutrons, then such nuclei are quite stable. As far as heavier nuclei is concerned, if the number of neutrons are greater than the number of protons, then such nuclei are stable. Now with this we have talked about nuclear stability. Let us move on to the next topic, that is the liquid drop model. Let us now have a look at the liquid drop model. So here is a chart which describes the liquid drop, the parameters, the liquid drop as well as the nucleus. It compares the properties of the liquid drop with that of a nucleus. Now the first property we look at here is a liquid drop is spherical in nature due to surface tension forces. Now here for a nucleus, from our experimental results and based on the past experiences with some of the scientists, this nucleus is assumed to be spherical in nature. The next property is the density of a liquid drop is independent of the volume. The density of a liquid drop is independent of the volume. When we look at the nucleus, we found out that the density of nucleus is independent of the volume. Remember, we did a calculation to find out the density of a nucleus, and we found that the density is independent of volume. It's not dependent on the radius of the spherical nucleus. Therefore, the density of the nucleus is independent of the volume. The third parameter is the intermolecular forces in the liquid are short range. When you look at the liquid drop, the intermolecular forces in the liquid are short range. Likewise, in the nucleus, as we discussed earlier, the nuclear forces that we discussed are short range. Yeah? They have a very short range. The nucleons interact only with neighboring nuclei. Because of the short range nuclear forces, the nucleons interact only with neighboring nuclei. And now the fourth one is when a small drop of liquid is allowed to oscillate, when the drop of liquid is allowed to oscillate, it breaks up into two smaller drops. This you would have observed, the drop of a liquid. And as we have a similar situation here in the nucleus, nuclear fission, as we will be discussing about nuclear fission subsequently. So the process of nuclear fission, which is analogous to a liquid drop breaking into two smaller drops, we have a nuclear fission in which this is a similar process in which two fragments of comparable sizes are produced. So I start out with a nucleus, then from that I will be getting two different nucleus if I start out with a single nucleus. By supplying some energy to the nucleus, I will end up getting two fragments of comparable sizes. So in terms of the properties, the nucleus is pretty similar to, the property of a nucleus is pretty similar to that of a liquid drop. And finally, we have a situation here whereas when the liquid drop is heated, when I supply heat energy to a liquid drop, the molecules at the surface evaporate due to increased thermal energy. And now in the case of a nucleus, when the nucleus is bombarded by suitable projectiles or suitable objects, the nuclear radiation is emitted. So here in this case we are giving thermal energy. Here we are supplying the thermal energy in terms of bombarding it with suitable projectiles. When we bombard it with suitable objects or projectiles, the nuclear radiation is emitted, which we'll be discussing subsequently when we talk about radioactivity, phenomena of radioactivity. So these are the properties. When we compare these properties, we find that nucleus behaves pretty similar to a liquid drop, and therefore we call this as a liquid drop model. It was suggested by Bohr and Wheeler. So the concept of liquid drop was originated from these two scientists, Bohr and Wheeler. Suggested that we can compare a nucleus with that of a liquid drop, and these are the similarities which the liquid drop as well as the nucleus has. So with this we are able to compare a liquid drop and nucleus, and this is a liquid drop model. It says that a nucleus behaves pretty similar to a liquid drop. Now with this we have just looked at how a nucleus behaves like a liquid drop. Now let us look at the limitations or the merits and demerits of a liquid drop model. So what it is able to explain, for example, these 5 parameters, when you look at these 5 parameters, there are similarities. So but based on these similarities, we can say the nucleus behaves like a liquid drop. Now the next question we have is, what are the merits and demerits of a liquid drop model? What are the phenomena that the liquid drop model can explain? What are the things or what are the phenomena, known things that a liquid drop model cannot be used to explain the observed phenomena? So let us now go over to that topic of finding out the merits and demerits of a liquid drop model. So now let us look at the merits and demerits of the liquid model. What the liquid model can explain and where it fails to explain the known or observed experimentation results. Now let us first look at the merits of the liquid drop model. Now the liquid drop model can be used to obtain an expression for the binding energy of the nucleus. This is very important. So by comparing nucleus with a liquid drop, we can find out the binding energy, expression for the binding energy of the nucleus. And next, the liquid drop model explains concepts such as binding energy, stability against alpha decay, beta decay and nuclear fission. We mentioned nuclear fission earlier when we were looking at the comparison of liquid drop with the nucleus. So these are topics we'll be discussing subsequently about alpha decay and beta decay. And now the third point here is the atomic masses and binding energy of a nucleus can be computed by using the liquid drop model. Now let us look at the demerits of the liquid drop model, where exactly it fails to explain the known experimental results. Now the liquid drop model fails to explain properties such as the measured spin. Remember we talked about the spin of a nucleus. So the liquid drop model fails to explain the measured spin and magnetic moments of the nuclei. This is one of the important demerits of the liquid drop model. So with this we have covered the liquid drop model. We have described what the liquid drop model is. That is, we are assuming the nucleus to be pretty similar to a liquid drop. And now we looked at the merits and demerits of the liquid drop model. Now after having discussed about these aspects, now let us move on to the next topic, that is nuclear magnetic resonance. Let us now discuss about the phenomenon known as nuclear magnetic resonance. So we have discussed earlier that a nucleus has got a spin. A nucleus has got spin angular momentum. The angular momentum is called a spin of the nucleus. And now let us consider the simplest nucleus here, which is 1HH. This is hydrogen. The hydrogen nucleus has got one proton and that's it. And hydrogen has one proton and one electron revolving around it. So the hydrogen, I am considering hydrogen here because hydrogen is used extensively in what is known as MRIs for imaging. Therefore let us discuss about the nuclear magnetic resonance phenomena in the context of hydrogen. So we know that the spin is quantized. The spin of a nucleus is also quantized. That means in the presence of, it's also known that in the presence of a magnetic field, the energy levels of this hydrogen nucleus can take on only two values. The spin is quantized. So what happens is, if I have a magnetic field here, in the presence of a magnetic field, the spin can take on two values. One is, now let us say this is the magnetic field applied, then I have the nucleus. Let me represent this nucleus by this. So if I have if this is the direction of rotation of the nucleus, then I call this as spin up. We call that as a spin up. That means this is the nucleus and it is rotating in this direction. The angular momentum is in this direction of the magnetic field. Now if I supply energy to this, then this nucleus absorbs that energy and it goes into a higher energy state. So in this we have a spin down. This is the spin down status. In this case, the nucleus is rotating in the other direction. So in this case, when it is spin up, the nucleus is rotating in this direction. So the moment is aligned along with the direction of the magnetic field. In the other case, when it acquires energy, it has spin down. The spin is pointing downward. It's spin, we call it as a spin down. So in this case, the nucleus is rotating in the other direction. Note that the energy level of the nucleus in this status is higher than that in this status. So basically what happens is, in the presence of a magnetic field, the energy of the nucleus is seen to get split into two levels. So this is a higher energy level and then this is the lower energy level. So this happens only in the presence of a magnetic field as shown here. So this will be the spin down position, this will be the energy associated with spin up position. So the difference in energy here, let us represent that by delta E. So let delta E be the difference in energy between these two levels. It is known that, it has been found that delta E is proportional to B bar. Let me call this as B bar. This is the magnetic field. This is a total magnetic field. B bar is a total magnetic field. And therefore I have delta E is equal to K B bar, where K is a constant. Where K is a constant and K is different for different nuclei. K is different for different nuclei. So let me recap again. So that I'm looking at hydrogen nuclei, and it is known that nuclei, it's a positive charged proton is there as part of the nucleus. So it acts as a tiny magnet. It acts as a tiny magnet, and the nucleus has got angular momentum. So in the presence of a magnetic field, the spin is quantized. It takes two values. One is spin up and spin down. It cannot take any other value. So the spin is up or the spin is down. Only two values. Effectively, when I translate that to the energy level diagram, I find that the energy level E naught is now split into two energy levels in the presence of a magnetic field. The higher energy level corresponds to spin down position, the lower energy level corresponds to the spin up position. And now it has been found that this difference in energy is directly proportional to the magnetic field available there, to the magnetic field that has been applied. And since I have delta E is proportional to B bar, I can as well write as delta E is equal to K into B bar. K is dependent on the type of nuclei. So for hydrogen I have a value of K, for helium the value of K is going to be different. So K is different for different nuclei. Now there's an interesting position here, interesting observation. Now what happens is, this is about the splitting of the energy level. Now let us assume that the spin is in this direction, spin up direction. Now if I send out radio frequency waves, if I send waves rather of appropriate frequency to this, what happens is this nucleus, pretty much similar to the electron absorbing radiation, this nucleus absorbs that radiation and then goes into the higher energy level. So the nucleus goes from this state to this state. Effectively the spin gets flipped. It was in spin up position, I supply radiation, I supply energy to that, so this nucleus absorbs that radiation and then goes into higher energy state. Effectively it is a spin down position. We say that the incident radiation has been absorbed. So let me write down what happens in this case. So when I supply an energy, corresponding to h nu, that h nu should be equivalent to delta E. So I supply an energy of frequency nu, then from Einstein's equation h nu is energy, so h nu is equal to delta E. So the frequency should be such that h nu will correspond to this delta E. Now if I look at this expression and this expression, I know that h nu is effectively K into B bar. That means the frequency is dependent on the magnetic field there. So the frequency that I need to supply, the radiation that I need, the energy of the radiation that I need to supply for me to make this nucleus go from one state to another state is dependent on the magnetic field there. So that's about the nuclear magnetic resonance. It's called nuclear magnetic resonance because the nucleus is involved here, and then the nucleus resonates by absorbing the energy and then going from one state to another state. So that is a resonant frequency. So that is why we call it as nuclear magnetic resonance. So it says that excites many nuclei from excitation of nuclei from the lower energy level to the upper energy level by absorption of incident radiation is called as resonance phenomena, and then we call that as the phenomena is known as nuclear magnetic resonance, because the nucleus is involved and it absorbs the energy incident on that and goes to a higher state. It's called as a nuclear magnetic resonance. Nuclear magnetic resonance, and the abbreviation for that is NMR. Now this is about the principle of nuclear magnetic resonance. There is a very interesting case here, and that is what happens is, since I observe that h nu equal to kB bar, what happens is there is a, if I have hydrogen, free hydrogen, and then I have hydrogen in the presence of other atoms. In the presence of other atoms. Let me find out what happens if I find h nu for as free hydrogen or hydrogen in the presence of other atoms. So if I look at free hydrogen, then this is what is happening here. It is dependent on the external magnetic field that I have applied. When I look at the case when I have hydrogen embedded or surrounded by atoms of other types, different molecules, right? Then what happens is the magnetic field, effective magnetic field, I need to talk about effective magnetic field, will be due to the externally applied magnetic field plus the magnetic field that are due because of the neighboring atoms. So the neighboring atoms or the atoms in the sample also contribute to the magnetic field, and therefore in that case h nu will be k into b bar, will be b1 bar, where b1 bar will be external magnetic field plus the magnetic field due to the surrounding atoms. So there is a shift in nu in this case. So this nu gets shifted, and the change of frequency in the presence of atoms for the hydrogen is called as chemical shift. It's called as chemical shift. The shift in frequency of resonance, the shift in frequency of resonance due to neighboring atoms is called as chemical shift. So with this we conclude our discussion on nuclear magnetic resonance. Next we will take up an interesting application of NMR, which is called as MRI. It is a magnetic resonance imaging. So we will continue in the next session. Thank you.